Good day. A day after the midterm budget policy statement by Minister of Finance Tito Mboweni, and here we meet again with my guests and friends who are going to help us make sense of the midterm policy statement by Minister of Finance. And this happens against the backdrop of recent announcement of the economic recovery and reconstruction plan by the government, and the economy itself not doing that well. Minister revealing yesterday that it actually is going to contract by 7.8% or thereabouts. And of course, government under collecting, as well as borrowing at higher rates than ever, with a possibility that the debt to GDP ratio may even go higher than 100% by 2023. That I think each minister spoke about 5.4 trillion rands being the overall debt that South Africa will have at that time. So the point of the discussion today with Lisa Seftel, who's the director at NEDLAC, is to look at parts of the recovery plan that were funded by the budget, or if there are any hints that this indeed is going to take us on a growth path. Busi Sibeko is with the Institute for Economic Justice. She's a researcher there, and she will be telling us her own views from how this budget can be used to reduce poverty as well as create opportunities. Alan Mukoki of the South African Chamber of Business will join us, and he will be speaking from the point of view of his members and what the business community expects from the government to stimulate the economy so we can get going. Now, Lisa, thank you very much. Let me start with you right away, because you've been involved in the process of putting together the economic recovery plan, and it's taken a long time. But I have to tell you this, that a lot of people think that the recovery plan is nothing more than all the plans that have preceded it being mashed together and then being made to sound like something new. And therefore, the confidence is not so strong, because the argument is that these are things that should have been done after all in the past, but never materialized. Now, this time around, they will only happen provided there's some funding that is given to this. So you tell me, Lisa, from your point of view, having been involved in putting the recovery plan together and the ultimate document that everyone agreed to, which parts do you think were amplified by the Minister of Finance's midterm policy statement? And welcome.
Okay. Thank you very much, Tim. Well, you've raised quite a lot of issues, and let me try and respond. I would say, maybe just starting where you ended, that I think what would require, maybe what you've been saying, that there isn't a lot new, and I think the social partners at NEDLAC, organized business, labor and community, and government would probably agree with you that there's not a lot new. And it's sad that there isn't a lot new. And I think it's because in the past, there's been a failure of implementation. And I suppose what we hope will be new and will be different is that with these plans or these commitments, that they will be implemented. And maybe what is slightly new is that the things, particularly that the social partners want to focus on, are things which are implementable and which can build business confidence, particularly in the context in which we are, where there isn't a lot of business confidence. So then you say, well, the critical thing is funding. And I'm not sure that the critical thing is funding. Funding is obviously important, particularly when you listen to the Minister of Finance. And there have been parts of his speech which talked to some of the funding commitments, particularly around employment creation. But more important for the social partners has been the issue of, can I say, capacity, capability, and maybe also political will. And one of the things which is a hallmark of this action plan is that there is a commitment to hold each other accountable so that the political will can eventualize as well as to provide capacity to the state where it's needed, so that these things are capable of being actioned. I hope I've addressed what you.
But I'm interested in the last point that you made. Actually, you mentioned something about political will. What do you mean? Where should the political will come from? How would it look like? And what difference would it make to the implementation of the recovery plan?
Well, let me take an example that has been discussed extensively at NEDLAC, which is, could I say, the political will to deal decisively with corruption. Now, ordinarily, you wouldn't think like an issue of corruption is a matter for an economic plan. But I think Business Lab and community have been united in saying that if you want to attract investment, if you want to build business confidence, government has to be seen to be acting effectively around corruption, and particularly, the issue at NEDLAC was around politically exposed persons. So I suppose when I talk about political will, it's that political will to act decisively around corruption, which then would generate business confidence and will mean that there would be investment. The investment strike that we see from many parts of the private sector may reduce.
Right, Busi, what is your reaction to what the minister announced yesterday? I suppose one of the more controversial decisions or announcements was the fact that money was found that was going to be given to SAA, but that money was taken from services such as education, health, even crime prevention. But money was found from all over the place to fund SAA, which apparently is going to be disposed of anyway. What was your reaction?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there were no surprises there in terms of the MTBPS. We are seeing continuous trends in the fiscal policy position that's been taken on, even beginning, for a very long time. Actually, I wouldn't even say beginning at the last MTBPS, but for the last 5 years, we know that, and in fact, over 5 years, there's been a focus on fiscal consolidation. Despite what our debt to GDP ratio tells us, there's been concerted effort for, consolidation over time. But I think critically, the one thing that the 2020 MTBPS failed to acknowledge is the failure of implementation.
Did we lose you, Busi? Okay, but can you hold on a second? We'll have to come back to you.
The 500 billion package itself. And there was a part where the minister was addressing where the money went. Okay, let me just check what's wrong.
Okay, we'll come back to you. Let me go to you, Lisa. But Lisa, you spoke about political will. Is what we are seeing now with the Hawks? Would you regard that as a sign that there is indeed political will to deal with corruption now?
Well, it's not really for me to say, but I think that the social partners are, the leadership of organized business, labor, community, and government are, need to make that evaluation. My role is to facilitate. But one of the issues in the Economic Recovery Action Plan that was highlighted was the need to reinforce and strengthen law enforcement agencies to do precisely what I think we've seen happening over the last week.
But what is your reaction to the fact that the government found money from elsewhere to fund SAA? Have you got any particular views regarding that?
I also don't have my own view about it. Well, I do have my own view about it, but I think the issue of SAA has not necessarily been canvassed a lot between the social partners. However, the issue of SOE reform is an important issue that the particularly business and labor would like to see from government. They would like to see much more greater proactivity, the establishment of the SOE Council and for it to start operate and to develop roadmaps to be able to properly recapitalize and ensure proper governance in those SOEs which are required to continue to exist, such as Eskom, Transnet, and so on, as well as to look at a rationalization process so that the number of SOEs can be reduced and those that are a drain on the fiscus should no longer continue to exist. I think there is a debate about whether SAA is a drain on the fiscus or whether it's a national asset, and whether this plan of the Department of Public Enterprises is going to be good for South Africa. Thanks.
All right, Busi, I noticed that you're back with us. Let me hear your views that we couldn't hear you earlier on.
No, sorry about that.
Yeah.
Wi-Fi issues, as you can imagine. But I don't know where you lost me. So I don't know if you'd like for me to start at the beginning or if you'd like for me to continue from a particular point.
Well, just give me your own view of the overall midterm statement against the backdrop of the competing interests. And one such thing that I know in the public domain, people are not happy with the fact that money was found for SAA, for instance.
Yeah, I think my general feelings about it is that the 2020 MTBPS fails to save the economy and lives. And why I say that is because we know the 500 billion was not implemented adequately. And so what I was looking for in the 2020 MTBPS is to see how it would address the failure to implement in its full force the 500 billion, even though we know the full 500 billion is not necessarily a stimulus in its entirety. And of course, we wanted to see an extension of grants, particularly the caregiver grant, as well as the top-ups. That would have been critical, something that we're looking for. But I think generally my sense is that the MTBPS fails to use fiscal policy as a tool for the revival of the economy. And of course, we see the austerity trends, which I've spoken at great lengths against. And in terms of saving SAA, I think it began noting the critical issues around that, which is that money is being allocated from other critical expenditure like basic education. And we have to think of basic education as critical for future development or economic development of South Africa. And so in saving SAA now, we are making a trade-off with the long-term important expenditure that is critical, one, for realizing human rights, but two, also that is critical for our human capital and our economy. So a lot of worries around that, and a lot of the other civil society organizations within the Budget Justice Coalition have started flagging where cuts have been made within their respective sectors, and of course worried about the cuts to police as well, given the high rates of gender-based violence and femicide, and the lack of mention of that in the document in its entirety. There's no gender, not even once, in the full MTBPS document. Well,
the other thing that I noticed is that we're told that we're going to have to borrow more, and that the amounts are going to go higher. And looking at some research which indicates that people who are receiving relief from the government, the numbers are increasing there. The number of people who've lost jobs, substantial, a lot over the past few months, as we know. The number of those who are paying taxes reducing. I actually spoke to the commissioner of the commissioner at SARS, Edward Kisveta, who says people who were paying what he called employment taxes had reduced by 12% and corporate taxes by 22%. Now, we are operating in that environment where the need for more money, the need for money is increasing and therefore will be borrowed, and the demand on the services also increasing, but the people who have the capacity to pay taxes reducing. How are we going to find the balance with such a high unemployment rate, Lisa? I understand when government says we're going to implement this, we may have an infrastructure here, we may have infrastructure there. But I wonder if that ultimately makes any difference in the economy in terms of companies being started and employment being created. Lisa.
That's like $1 million question there. I think that we can't run away from the fact that South Africa is facing its gravest crisis ever, that it is on the precipice of a cliff, and that it is possible that if some of the measures that have been announced by the minister don't eventualize, that the measures don't evangelize, that we could be facing a significant crisis. And I think that is what the Minister of Finance signaled yesterday. So, you know, the best step forward is not necessarily one step. You know, I think the social partners do believe that infrastructure is an important step. It does, in the short term, create jobs. It sends a signal of investment confidence. But it is also possible that infrastructure which doesn't become productive may become a white elephant, or, you know, we might see some of the situations that we've seen in Eskom around Medupi and Kusile and so on. I think that the economy can't grow by government. Government enables the economy to grow. Then the real challenge rests with the private sector to invest and to become more productive. And, you know, the economic recovery plan plus the work of the social partners is really meant to, there's a lot of talk, for example, amongst the social partners about agreeing enabling mechanisms or enabling reforms or structural reforms. What are the critical pillars that you want in place that can really help to turn around the economy? And those enablers or structural reforms really relate to things like digital inclusion, making sure that spectrum is auctioned, increasing the number of ways in which electricity can be generated, improving particularly some of the issues around the movement of freight, and imports and exports can happen more expeditiously and cheaper. And that's really, you know, what's at stake. And increasingly more important than the fiscal framework. The fiscal framework is critical, but the challenge, so that if we don't fall off the fiscal cliff, is going to be on us being able to put in place these enabling reforms which will enable investment.
Well, but Lisa, let me just come in there and say, you know, look at it from the point of view of people who've lost jobs or whose businesses had to shut down, that all of these things that we are talking about now, they're not necessarily new. They've just been amplified by the COVID-19 experience. And you know, that we should do this, we should do that, all the things that we are discussing now, these are known things that have been there on the agenda for a long time. Now with this high unemployment rate, and an unemployed person is thinking, or a person who's just had their business liquidated is thinking, when do these things happen? Actually, it's great to talk about them, but when do we start seeing an urgent kind of response from those who can make things happen? Because it doesn't seem like this is regarded as an emergency yet.
I hear what you're saying. I must say, from where I stand, I think that, you know, emergency is a good word. If you look at the government recovery plan, they have a table where they indicate things that must happen in 0 to 6 months. And some of the things that I'm talking about are in that 0 to 6 month scenario. However, there is also a need, and it was reflected to some extent also in the budget, you know, to have social protection for those people who have really become unemployed or have their businesses are in distress. And you know, I think it's a matter of dispute about whether they're sufficient, but definitely within NEDLAC, that has also been a focus, particularly of organized labor, to say we must have a stronger floor around social protection. For example, a relief from the Unemployment Insurance Fund, ongoing grants, and so on.
Of course, and somebody has got to earn income to at least contribute via taxes so that those things happen. But if the number of taxpayers is reducing, and then the number of people earning incomes to look after their families are also reducing, one wonders what kind of society we're going to end up with. It's already under pressure. We're already under serious pressure as matters stand. So you know, at what point do we think we have to find a balance there? To my mind, it would be an urgent matter to make sure that businesses, smaller ones in particular, are supported enough to grow so that they can employ more people. Busi, what is your view? Busi Sibeko.
Yes, I think for me, critically, the question I've been asking is what is new about this policy? And the reason why I ask this is because we've come from gear, we've had a lot of plans, and the question ultimately is what is fundamentally different? And I don't believe that the way we're using fiscal policy in this framework of macroeconomic policy and acknowledging here that, you know, there's many other elements, and I'm focusing particularly on fiscal policy, is to say that it's really not going to change our economy in the ways that we need it to. You've already mentioned this sustainability that we need to be able to finance, for instance, you know, social protection through taxes. But of course, taxes aren't the only way that we can guarantee social protection. There's many other resources that can be mobilized. But I think critically, I wanted to comment on the plan itself, because I think the focus is structural reform. It's on cost of doing business. It's about, you know, reducing bottlenecks in supply chains. It's about infrastructure expenditure. But then when we look at infrastructure expenditure over the last couple of years, it's been declining in South Africa, yet and now we want to reinvigorate it as the key to development. And I think what we need to do is that there's a lot of supply side focus, which is important. Yes, supply side infrastructure is important. Like we need like supply side reforms, but I think critically we also need demand side policies. And I think most of the time our national treasury shies away. You know, doing demand side economics is a bit more challenging, and it requires a more interventionist approach. And I know, you know, Lisa says that, you know, it's not government to make the economy, but I think in this critical moment, government expenditure can lead to structural transformation if done correctly, and if it's spent in the right sectors. And in fact, we can't wait for private sector to come to the table. We almost have to like model what we mean by what we want, right? If we want a green new future, we must put money in the budget to invest into a green new future for Eskom, which is not there currently. So I do think this is a critical moment where fiscal policy could have been mobilized better to begin to implement those building blocks that ultimately change our economy. And I just to last comment to say that I think importantly, it's the debt servicing cost was one of the things that have been raised, right? And you note in the MTBPS, they say that debt servicing costs or borrowing costs have declined, but then there's no acknowledgement of some of the measures that have been undertaken. For instance, SARB's intervention is one of the multiple reasons why borrowing costs have declined. And then the question is, why can't we use those sort of measures? You know, SARB could definitely be doing more to reduce the cost of borrowing of government in this given, well, in the future, even not even just right now, but ongoing. And so I think there's really deeply underutilization of policy space to be able to make those realities happen.
Ivor Fletcher says, what reaction can we expect from the ratings agencies after yesterday's MTBPS? And Hunty Kruger says, my well-educated professional friends are emigrating on a weekly basis. We need new leaders these days. No use keeping the old, no use to keep old ways going and hoping things will improve with the same mindset, the same attitude that things have got to change and be done differently. Your thoughts? One, ratings agencies. Busi, you can take that, or Lisa, I'm not sure who wants to take that, but Lisa, I want you to take Hunty Kruger's question regarding a new way of doing things. So Busi, can you go on the ratings agencies?
Yeah, so I mean, we know that part of the, you know, the big deal around debt to GDP is actually about appeasing the ratings agencies. And so, of course, they'll be happy to see that there are attempts to reach a surplus. So that will obviously be a good indication to them. But the thing is, ultimately, the question is, do they buy that what we are doing will lead to growth or to better confidence? And from what I hear is that confidence, well, from the left leaning even, like the spectrum, that not many people are necessarily convinced. So I think it's really about, yeah, the debt to GDP ratio is very critical, and our debt to GDP ratio is supposedly going to increase to 95%. So they might say that that's too high, or they might, you know, decide that that's an acceptable move. But I do think that Treasury did heed the calls that the austerity measures were too sharp. And so what they've tried to do is make austerity over 5 years as opposed to like deep austerity in 3 years to reach a surplus. So maybe that might work in their favor. But really, I think in my political view or political economy view is that really most of these measures are to really appease the markets, and you know, they've done what.
Well, but there's another promise that was made, and that is to curb the wage expenditure of government, right? And one wonders whether that is possible, given that there are agreements in place with the unions on the part of the government, and the unions have said that they want government to honor its promise. Can government control its wage bill, Lisa?
Are you asking me that question now, not the previous question about mindset? You're coming back to that one?
I'm coming back to this one, plus the earlier question about people who are immigrating.
Can government control the wage bill?
Yes.
Well, I think that they are trying their best to do that. The minister did indicate that there's ongoing discussions with the unions. And I think there were also signals in his speech that one shouldn't only, when you're looking at wages, be looking at the wage bill of the provincial and national government, where there are a lot of teachers and doctors and nurses and professionals, but also look at the wage bill more broadly within SOEs and local government. And I think it might be in that context of looking more broadly at almost a patriotic imperative to reduce wages where a better solution may lie. So I think the verdict is still out. The government does sound very determined that they want to reduce the wage bill, and how and in what way they'll do it, I think is yet to be seen. Which maybe brings me to the other question about attitude and mindset.
Yes.
I think your listener is absolutely right. A lot of this is about mindset. And I think, you know, it's a difficult one. From where I sit, I think that there are some people who are very determined that we are facing the gravest crisis that we ever have, and that the mindset must change. The commitment to collaborate, the commitment to work together despite differences, in some ways is more than ever before. The commitment, I think, that you can see from the government and from the law enforcement agencies to take a strong stand against corruption is probably more than ever before. And I think those are indications that maybe the mindset is, our crisis has made the mindset to shift. But again, I think it's something which needs to constantly be worked upon. Thanks.
All right, let me welcome Alan Mukoki, the CEO of SACCI, who's joining us via phone. Alan, thank you very much for joining us. And let me right away get your reaction to the midterm budget policy statement by the minister yesterday. What did you make of it? What works? What do you think is recovery oriented in that statement? Welcome, Alan.
Thank you. Welcome to, good morning, good afternoon. To Lisa and Busi and yourselves, I've listened to everything that everyone else was saying. Look, Tim, I think that the minister had a lot of balls to juggle in the air. These are very difficult times, and he was trying to survive. But as to the recovery and the reconstruction, we haven't seen much in this particular budget that should give a level of confidence and assurance that it will take us to that level of reconstruction or recovery, whatever the case might be, and the words that are actually being used. So I think that the minister was really trying to find himself some kind of balance so that the system does not collapse in its entirety, try and stabilize political partners, whether that is the society, in terms of we will continue to pay the social grants, and make sure that the labor people are a little bit happy and the business community is a little bit happy. But at this point in time is more survivalist, and I don't think that we can, at this point in time, talk recovery in its true earnest, because we haven't. Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm just coming in there, Alan, because I would like to hear more, what the mood is like within your constituency, within the chamber. What are your members telling you? What do they expect from the government, given the fact that a lot of business people had to shut down during the lockdown, and people are losing jobs, and everyone is looking for opportunities, and it looks like they are hard to come by in this kind of environment. So what is the mood like, and what do your members expect?
Well, you know, the mood obviously is still one of apprehension, because people have not seen that which they thought they could actually see. It's a Band-Aid story at this point in time. But what our members would have expected are positions that we've taken very firmly and very decidedly in the past, and that go for significant structural reform, especially around the capability of the state, because quite a number of the things that we're promising can be done have to be initiated and driven at the state level, from policy transformation throughout creating a level of effectiveness and execution capability around the things that we'd like to see being done. Now, we've raised this issue very clearly that says, if you say the Auditor General is making the argument that more than 200 municipalities were dysfunctional in times when there were not significant challenges, and now you're putting together a recovery plan that is going to depend largely on the very same local government to deliver, but you don't change the personnel, you don't fix the fundamental problems that caused that dysfunctionality in the first place, then you are not actually doing what is supposed to be done. So that's the first point. That's the first point.
Yeah.
That's the first point. So the main point is that the government needs to really restructure, and that restructuring has got to be one that is serious, where we start with a skills audit throughout government and say that when we talk recovery, you have the level of skill and resource and capability that can take us from this particular point to the next point. So that's what the issue really is. So we haven't actually seen that. We haven't seen the government showing a level of seriousness around the appointment of key personnel to key positions, whether it's in cabinet, whether it's heads of SOEs, boards of SOEs, etc. That has not actually happened because we have not really adopted a meritocracy.
Okay.
The times that we're living in, yes.
Yeah, sorry, I mean, you raised the point of meritocracy, and I'm quickly thinking
the times we're living in right now, they mean the challenges that South Africa is facing is that we need to have a meritocracy. It's not business as usual. You cannot tell me that the people that have led us to be where we are today are the same people that can actually take us out of the rut that we find ourselves in. So we need to take this matter very seriously of how we upskill the government environment. It's not just talk. It's not just the issue of corruption. There are two parts. It's corruption and incompetence, and there are two sides of exactly the same coin. So
and then which takes us back to politics then, because you know, the way you are saying it, a couple of points come to mind. One, I read somewhere they say the municipalities owe state-owned entities, by the way, state-owned entities are owed 172 billion rands by the municipalities. You know, the same bailouts in some instances of additional funding that's needed is partly as a result of municipalities not paying for the bulk services that they get, whether it be from water boards or it be from ESCOM, etc. Now, the documents have been put together, and then you're saying there has to be a skills audit which emphasizes meritocracy. That is not going to happen, at least not at municipal level. I don't think it will happen now. Next year, it's election time, and you know how it is. Focus is going to be on winning those municipalities than delivering services, don't you think, Lisa?
No.
Okay, no, go ahead, Alan, and then I'll go to Lisa.
If it doesn't happen, then we don't actually have a plan, team. We speak about the National Development Plan.
Yeah.
We talk in the context of South Africa, for South Africa to resolve its problems permanently of unemployment, poverty, and inequality. We need to accept the template that says we need to move South Africa from a developing economy into a developed economy. There's less than 8 countries in the last 100 years that have moved their economies from developing to developed. You count amongst those South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, Japan, old Hong Kong, Australia, Russia, Israel. And if you look at the fundamental structure of what it is that they first did was to adopt this principle of a meritocracy. Yeah? Most people are saying China and Brazil will probably join that illustrious group of countries maybe in the next 10 years or so. South Africa does not have any options and choices. That is the start of everything else. If you don't fix the idea of the right skills, the right values, the right culture, forget about any plan that we are putting together that can take us from developing to developed. So we need to take that particular matter very, very seriously, because we need to be able to say, can we learn anything from South Korea? Can we learn anything from Taiwan?
I'm coming back to you in a moment. I just want to hear Lisa's view and Busi's view on what we've just said. That change, those who have to implement, and to a large extent, you will be making progress. Change their culture and get the right skills in the right place. Lisa?
Well, yes, I think that is true, change of culture and right skills. I think the debate about meritocracy in South Africa is a little bit more complicated, particularly bearing in mind our previous history and the important need for redress and, I suppose, employment equity and so on. But I think it really talks a little bit to what Busi talked about earlier on, is that there needs to be much more smarter and more significant investment in human resources at a school level, preschool level, and university level, as well as within the skills development structures. And that also is one of the focuses of the Economic Recovery Plan, to both review some of the skills strategies and also to enable empowerment, you know, in this new world of ours, this digitalization and so on. Yeah, let me leave it there.
And Busi?
Yeah, I think that is state capacity is something that I'm deeply interested in, and I, you know, there's multiple ways to think about it. The one is when we talk about these skills development and all these great initiatives, the first thing that comes to mind is that this needs funding, and you cannot have this, like, skills don't magically come out, right? You need to spend for that to happen. And in the context of austerity, I don't know where that's going to come. In fact, I would argue that the austerity measures undermine the functionality of the state, and in fact undermine therefore state capacity. And in, you know, even the anti-corruption strategies require funding to be able to implement, right? Like, so we can't assume some of these strategies can be separated from money. They're just not interventions like policy that, you know, even policy needs money, but that's the point. I think I completely agree. I think for me, structural transformation, and that's why I'm deliberate about not saying structural reform, is because structural transformation takes into account state capacity, corruption, all these different measures. We need a holistic intervention, right? Like, we can't think of the budget as an accounting exercise, and that's where National Treasury ends, you know? We need to think about, for instance, in the United States, I said this the last time, they're implementing fiscal stimulus with anti-corruption strategies. How do we reframe our fiscal policies so that these policies are thought of within the context of how do we spend to build capacity, and how do we spend to also make sure that we avoid corruption, or, you know, in particular ways like that. So that's where I'm going to state capacity around fiscal policy.
All right, well, Howard Callahan says, is it not a historic fact that a country that passes a debt to GDP ratio of more than 60% has never recovered to financial health? Alan, would you know something about this? Alan, are you there?
Hi, sorry, Tim, I didn't hear what the other speaker was saying.
Howard was saying that, is it not a historic fact that a country that passes a debt to GDP ratio of more than 60% has never recovered to financial health?
I don't know about that, but I don't think that that's believable. I mean, why should it not? I mean, there are so many things that can be done to change the trajectory of South Africa. We're so down right now that we can definitely improve in many, many aspects, and with much more bigger opportunities. I mean, the Africa Growth Free Trade Agreement offers us unbelievable opportunities. All we need is vision, all we need is innovation, all we need is the right people doing the right things.
You know, Alan, sorry, you make it sound like so simple that this can be done, right? This and that. I'm not sure how you'll bring everything together. You mentioned something about meritocracy, but where should it start? Should it start at municipal level? People look to the national government and say, but we have how many departments now? 41 or 40 something plus
35.
35?
Well, Tim,
yeah.
we always try to pretend as though our problems are unique. We're not unique in any event. When Lee Kuan Yew took over in Singapore, the majority of people in that country were below the poverty level. When Deng Xiaoping took over in China, he changed and drove some of the most fundamental transformations that the world has ever seen. These things are not new. Other people have done these things, right? Kim in South Korea has actually done exactly the same thing. So there's nothing that cannot be done. Everything is doable, but we need to be able to say we've got the will to be able to do those things.
But you know, I mean, look at the amount of time it takes before we arrive at a consensus of sorts on what needs to be done. Let me start first with the government or the ruling party, the ANC itself. Within it, you know, there are many different views within the ANC when something has got to be done, as we know. Then you go to NEDLAC, where Lisa is, she would know, different stakeholders, different interests. They pull in different directions, and then it takes long for anything to be agreed to. Ultimately, it gets agreed to. My view now, and you can correct me, Lisa, if I'm wrong, then we're told this is how stuff is going to work, but you don't see anybody owning a part of the recovery plan to say, I am responsible for this. These are the people who are going to drive all the changes that we would like to see. So it's like we hope, because we say so, we hope that this gets implemented in time at some future time.
The transformation that we're talking about requires even transforming the state and its own constitution. South Africa, in terms of its challenges today, Tim, cannot survive the type of democracy that we're running as we do. We need to have an executive president. We need to make sure that we can hold someone accountable, not a political party that is going to send representatives to parliament, and you cannot even hold those people accountable. I'm saying that there are templates. There are people who've done this successfully. These 8 countries have done it successfully. South Africa cannot continue in the mode where we want to go to NEDLAC. What's happening at NEDLAC? I go to NEDLAC myself. You can't expect much at NEDLAC because NEDLAC is more of a consultation chamber. It's not a strategy outfit where you can go there and get the best ideas. As a matter of fact, the majority of ideas, of the greatest ideas, are going to actually be found outside of NEDLAC and not within NEDLAC. So what you want to do, you want to have a situation where you don't want an executive president that is going to be always looking behind his shoulder. You can say whatever you like about Donald Trump, but he takes decisions. He doesn't have to consult the Republican Party every time he wants to take an executive decision. So South Africa has reached a stage where we need to have a president who is accountable to the voters. We need to have parliamentarians that are directly accountable to the voters so that when we take these kinds of decisions, we can actually take these decisions in a way that is very much decisive and very, very quick. Lee Kuan Yew did exactly the same thing. Deng Xiaoping did exactly the same thing. The point I'm making is that you need to change fundamentally. When we say structural reform, that structural reform includes the political arrangement that you have running the country, because it's now a weakness. It is no longer a strength that you must go and elect a political party, and then the political party will choose a president. It will go to the National Assembly. Then you've got all these things called NEDLAC. There is not a single thing in South Africa that must not change. Everything must be on the table for it to be reviewed, for it to be revolutionized, for it to change so that we can be much more effective. The structure right now is not effective.
David Pretoria says comparing South Africa to South Korea and Singapore is a massive stretch, that, you know, it can only exist in, I'm just adding, in your imagination. Is, you know, that it will never happen that way. But anyway,
it can happen.
Lisa, you heard what Alan said. Now that within the NEDLAC structures, you can consult one another, but it's not necessarily a place where ideas are generated. Is he right? Because if that's the case, then we need to take ideas from this forum that we're having now, this webinar, encourage people to give us more creative ideas than can be generated within NEDLAC.
To some extent, he's right. You know, if you want to bake a nice cake, it's not a one-ingredient cake. And where does NEDLAC historically has fitted in a particular place, which is consultation of certain organized constituencies about key social and economic matters. Because if you do that, this NEDLAC was set up after 1994. You enrich. It is part of building a participatory democracy with due regard to important stakeholders. I think what has happened, particularly under President Cyril Ramaphosa, is that the notion of social compacting has emerged very strongly, which involves, yes, consultation, but goes a little bit beyond that in terms of being able to hold the different social partners accountable. And so I think a point that was made earlier on about there needs to be drivers. Yes, there do need to be drivers. There need to be people that can be held individually accountable for executing certain things. And I think what's happening, the role of NEDLAC is shifting, in addition to other mechanisms like Parliament, to be able to say, we want to get this economy right. We're saying this is what you must do. This is what we're saying you business must do. Can we, in a forum like NEDLAC, hold each other accountable? Thanks.
Right, Busi, I mean, we can talk all the time, and we should, because that's how we plant ideas, right, into the system and each other's heads, that here is a thought to be considered. Now, the allocations are made, plans adopted, the implementation side. What would work from your point of view that you think in the immediate term should give us confidence and a boost that we're headed the right direction?
I think the first thing is the full implementation of the 500 billion. I can't stress that enough. That cannot still be our framework. And like I already said, yesterday the finance minister said, this is how we spent the 500 billion. But when you look at the 200 billion credit facility, you'll see that as of August, late August, only 13.9 billion had actually been dispersed to businesses. We haven't implemented the 500 billion. I feel like if we could implement that, that'll give me hope that there's some way to go, because actually we would have seen very different outcomes if we'd implemented that 500 billion. We wouldn't have seen 16.4% potentially GDP contraction if we'd implemented it in its full force. We wouldn't have potentially have seen 2.2 million people go into unemployment, right? So the cost is really, like, we can see the impact of a lack of, and I can't obviously say it's a causal thing that if we'd spent the 500 billion, this wouldn't have been the result, but it's to say that we missed that opportunity, because the best responses are ones that are timely and targeted in every single country. Where you look where countries have recovered and move forward is when the implementation has been like in place in terms of the emergency rescue package. So I think one, that review of the loan conditions should have been done by now, right? To make it easier for businesses to access that finance. You've already mentioned SMMEs. That should have been done and dusted by now. There should have been a full paying out of the grants. I can't believe that months later, people were still fighting for a payout of the grants. That should have happened way faster. SACCI really needed to get it together and make sure that money was spent adequately. I think we also need, in terms of implementation, critically, is that accountability component that has been discussed. When we talk about where is the government expenditure to date, in fact, that should have been a report we got yesterday. Out of the 20 or 45 or 20 billion we put to health, we've used 10 billion and we've built XYZ hospitals. There's a second wave coming. And I can't tell you from where I'm sitting what happened with that initial allocation for health. I can't tell you substantively that we are prepared for a second wave. So it's really also about accountability and transparency to say that, you know, this is how we spent the money and this is where we are. So those are the other two things that I think are critical. But yeah, the implementation has to start with the package that was promised.
Well, Lisa, we've gone through this several times that you've been involved in the plans. Are you confident now that we are on the right path, that stuff is going to happen?
That's a tall order. I think let's not say the path. Let's say that the direction is more in the right direction than in the wrong direction. And will the plans happen? I think there are, you know, sufficient signals that we would have more implementation than previously. Cautious optimism, Tim.
Okay, well, why are you cautious about it?
Well, as I said, well, for two reasons. I mean, one is that we don't live in as COVID has shown us, we don't live in a society anymore which we can control outcomes, and that there's a lot of black swans and things which are unpredictable. And secondly, as was discussed earlier on and raised also by Alan, there are severe capacity constraints that now exist in our country.
You were saying? Severe constraints that exist in our country. Let's see if we
capacity constraints. I was confirming the point that Alan was making.
Okay, Alan, are you there, Alan?
I'm here, Tim.
Sorry, we lost you for a second.
Yeah. Well, yes, indeed. I think that I didn't hear the other speakers, but the bottom line is that there is no way the other comment came from someone who said that we can't compare South Africa with South Korea. As a matter of fact, the economy of Ghana was 2 times the size of the South Korean economy in the 60s. And they don't have any mineral resources. So in effect, we need to understand and learn the histories of these people who have done well so that we can learn what we need to be able to do on our side. So I'm saying, and we insist making this particular point, we need a level of agency that we've never seen before. But
Alan, I'm sorry I have to interrupt you there, right? You say we need this level of agency, and so, but do you see that agency anywhere in the system? Do you get a sense that there are people who think along your lines in the political system?
No, they're not. That is the point. That's why we raise the point, because if people were there, they were taking things very urgently, then we wouldn't be saying that we need a level of agency. We need a level of agency with structural reform. There's no way to get around that. We've said this other point, the cabinet needs to get out of putting themselves in a position where they are appointing boards of SOEs, because they don't have the competence, the experience, or the skill to be able to do that. Part of the problems with all these SOEs is because who are the principals? Who are the people doing the appointments? We've made the argument we need to create a JSC type structure, a Judicial Services Commission type structure, that will then look at how to appoint board to SOEs and ensure that the boards are independent, the non-executive boards, so that they themselves will go and appoint the executives that should run. So we can't get out of that. We know that we can pretend to say corruption, incompetence. We know that we shouldn't be allowing cabinet to be putting together boards of SOEs. It starts there. And if we're not willing to take those really significantly tough decisions, we're going to end up having a serious problem. Also with cabinet itself, not all there are many cabinet ministers there who are really good, who are really competent, but the government does not do a lot of leadership development training and coaching that is known and impressive. So you take people from the street, they want an election, they go on, they go to the NEC, they go through, they become appointed by the cabinet minister, and the next thing you are giving them this huge big task that they should actually handle. You don't check their background, where do they come from? So that meritocracy is a thing that says create a template that says president, your cabinet ministers should be able to meet this particular level of competence. Your senior service level executives, they should be able, everybody should apply for their job, because if we create a meritocracy, how do you know that the current DG of Treasury is actually going to make it? That's where we should be going to. And we should change the compensation structure as well of this. There is absolutely no reason why you say to me, there are 35 government departments, you're going to have 35 DGs, why those DGs should not be paid at exactly the same level as the C-suite level executives that are in any other JSE company, whether they're getting 5 or 8 million, it doesn't matter, because we're spending billions and losing billions. We're spending billions on consultants as it is. We're losing billions of wastage in any event. If you open up those jobs and make them far more competitive because of the challenge that we're facing in the country, then you get the right level of skills, and then you change the culture, you change the values, and you hold people accountable, and you make sure that you create a high performance culture. Without doing that, I don't think that we can do anything for South Africa.
Well, I mean, the culture that you're talking about, that's a massive step, right? And may take long to realize in South Africa, given the political history and the political understanding. The political culture would not allow that. Not now, not in the meantime.
That's why it should change. That's why the political culture should. Took Lee Kuan Yew almost 30 to 35 years to move Singapore from developing to developing.
But he could do it because he was doing it by himself. Now you've got to go through different conferences, workshops, and get different factions to agree. And it's
exactly.
We have to stop seeing the South Africa through the eyes of the ANC. We need to see South Africa as citizens of the change that we ourselves can implement and change. Even if you look at the ruling party only has less than 1 million members. They have more than 10 million voters who are absent from those branches, We can't keep complaining when the problem is ours. We can make the change that we need to make in this country. We just need to wake up and stop. Forget about who is running the ANC at a particular point in time. Whether the ANC is still the platform in the future, it's okay. But if you've got an organization where less than 10% of its own total voting members are actually absent, you cannot tell me that that is not an opportunity. That is a massive opportunity to drive the change that is required.
And Chadwick says, surely some action regarding state capture corruption, imprisoning culprits, recovering funds should inspire investment in the country to assist on our road to recovery. I suppose that helps build a little bit of confidence. But again, the system as is, how and when is that going to change? My other question, as we come to the end of this webinar, is that I don't hear much being said on being done with regards small, medium-sized businesses. You know, the kind of assistance that they should be given, including, for that matter, informal businesses. It tells us a lot of people want to run their own businesses. They take the risk, they set them up, but they do so on their own with limited or no support. Alan, a brief comment from you, and then Busi, and then we'll conclude with you, Lisa.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I think that we need to just move on, and we as South Africans, we need to take the responsibility at an individual level so that we have a covenant as individuals in terms of what is my covenant with the Republic of South Africa. It's not about the political party. So we fix the problems that we're currently facing. We know that it's going to be difficult, but it's not the first time that other countries have faced the difficulties, as I said, and I'll end it there, Tim. Thank you.
All right. And Busi, what are your thoughts on how we assist informal, small, medium-sized businesses? Because we talk all the time, but in practical terms, limited support.
Yeah, I think I'll begin with the informal businesses, which, as you can imagine, have not been adequately dealt with in the reconstruction plans themselves. I don't think South Africa approaches the informal economy in appropriate ways, and I guess in this point I'm reflecting on my master's thesis, which is actually about SMMEs and industrialization. I actually think that our approaches currently are not sufficient enough to help SMMEs build productively to grow. So in fact, we need to go back to the drawing board. We need to revisit the evidence, the global evidence about how do you help SMMEs, because currently, you know, like skills are not going to help our SMMEs become more productive. In fact, some of them just need pure subsidies to learn, you know, to learn how to be more productive. And my professor used to say, people learn how to be better at a factory by being a part of a different factory. And so you tell us about how in certain countries that go to, you know, the Asian economies and stand in the factory and see how things are assembled. Because a factory is just decisions about how to assemble things, you know. So I think critically we need to review how our neoliberal policies also impact our SMMEs and why they're not growing.
Sure. All right, Lisa, there was talk about efficiencies within the government, especially at municipal level. I would like you to comment on that, as well as the assistance that you think can be given, should be given to informal, small, medium-sized enterprises to get going and create employment.
Sure. I think that the issues of efficiencies is a critical one, and it relates to the discussion that we had earlier on about the need to build a capable state. And it is an imperative. It's not necessarily easy after all we've been through. On the issue of SMMEs, and I wouldn't want to, you know, I agree with what Busi and Alan are saying, but one of the biggest challenges is that for SMMEs to flourish, there must be demand. And one of the tragedies of COVID is that demand has just been cut, like in tourism or hospitality and so on. And so that's why going forward, there has to be a balance of, you know, support and social protection and support to build entrepreneurship, because you know, they've really taken a big blow as a result of something completely outside of their control. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much, Lisa Seftel and Busi Sibeko, as well as Alan, who could not join us on the webinar, but joined us via phone, for your inputs. I appreciate you sharing your thoughts with us as we were discussing the midterm budget review by Minister of Finance Tito Mboweni, as well as the Economic Recovery and Reconstruction Plan. Will it work? Well, looks like we still have got stumbling blocks to overcome. Change the system, change the culture. Those won't happen right away, but they will be very, very demanding on the leadership of the country. Thanks to the attendees as well and for your questions. To everybody, have a fantastic day.